We are back for day 2 at the Can Diversity Collective's Inkwell Beach Can Live. Welcome to day 2. If you did not experience day 1, you literally missed out on some fascinating conversations. We had the 600. We had our crew that talked about the LGBTQ community. We had some exciting things happening. Today is Tech Tuesday, and I've already put out in our tweets and our Instagram posts that you will be much smarter when you leave this session today. So we hope that you are prepared with notes and just an open mind to have some great conversation. I'm really excited this morning for our first conversation on inclusive design. We have Kelly Monday with us, and she is coming in from the UK. So welcome, Kelly. And then we also have Christina Mallon, who is in the US and New York City with us. So we're going to get started and say welcome. And I'm going to allow you guys to introduce yourself. We'll start with Christina.
Hey guys, thanks so much for coming out today. My name is Christina Mallon. I am the global head of inclusive design and accessibility at Wunderman Thompson, which is a WPP company. And at night, I run Open Style Lab, which is an incubator founded at MIT and now at Parsons, where we look at how do we create inclusive design that benefits people with disabilities. And why I'm obsessed with disability is that about 10 years ago, both my arms became completely paralyzed. And Kelly, off to you.
Thanks, Christina. So, hi, I'm Kelly Monday. I work for Microsoft. I'm the global client lead for WPP. So I manage the relationship between Microsoft and WPP. Why I care about inclusive design is I'm dyslexic, proud dyslexic, and inclusive tech really helps me. Personally, it helps WPP and their employees become more collaborative with each other and really empower them. And I think without this type of technology, it's very, very difficult for people with accessibility needs to do the great work such as what Christina does.
So I'm glad you both are here. Thank you for the great, brief, and concise introductions, because I know there's so much deeper in both of you in terms of the work that you do. And a lot of this in the conversations that we've had together have been stemmed around inclusion and diversity. And I think typically when people talk about inclusion and diversity, they're speaking specifically about race or gender, socioeconomic issues. But inclusive design and this conversation around being dyslexic and neurodiversity is something that has been around for a while, but not talked about in a way that I think you guys are bringing to the forefront. So I'd really like to hear about what does inclusion and diversity mean to you, and how do you, put that work out and become advocates for that type of work?
Okay. Yeah, Kelly, please go.
Honestly, Christina, you go.
Okay. So really diversity when it comes to inclusive design. So inclusive design is a methodology that allows for designs that can be product, that can be interactions, that can be ads, that really take in the lived experiences of many different types of people, not just the designer themselves. And when I talk about designer, I don't mean traditional, well, it can be a graphic designer, but everyone is a designer. Anyone who creates something, makes a decision, manages something, has an interaction, is a designer of experiences. And that's, really the definition of inclusive design. And how diversity and inclusion come there is diversity of thought, making sure that the designers are interacting or are themselves have multiple different backgrounds from race, ability, sexuality, religion, and gender. And then when inclusion is really inviting them to either create those experiences or to provide input into those experiences. So, diversity is really, inviting them to the party, as diversity and inclusion is really asking them to dance. And that's kind of how I look at my vision of inclusion and diversity, and how I apply it to the work that I'm doing at Wunderman Thompson, and specifically with Microsoft.
Yeah, I agree, Christina. I think diversity is about ensuring that we have really good representation across all types, whether it's disability, whether it's race, whether it's gender. If we're designing products for the world, it has to be representative of that world, and that requires diversity. Otherwise, there will be biases in the product. That's, Microsoft are very, very focused on this. Our whole mission statement is around empowering every person and organization on the planet. To do that, we have to be representative of every person and organization on the planet, right? So it's no good us designing products without the people in mind. I think from an inclusion perspective, it's really important that we put the human being at the center of what we're thinking about with inclusion. So it's about understanding that whole person and being inclusive with their skill set, with the way that they think. Just because they're different to you doesn't mean they don't bring a point of view that's valuable. And I think the inclusion piece, for me, especially when I haven't always been, because I have a hidden disability, I haven't always been as open about it. And people make assumptions about you and your capabilities. I think inclusion at Microsoft, I felt a lot more comfortable in when I joined Microsoft to be open about who I am in all of its faculties, and be accepted for that, and really be included in the way that I need to work, and people understanding that and really embracing that, right? So for me, it's about really knowing the human being and putting the human being at the center of everything.
Definitely.
There are, you guys talked a little bit about it surfacely, but there's some real numbers that really, make this thing hit hard. I know, Kelly, you are dyslexic, and a lot of people don't even know they're dyslexic or not diagnosed that they're dyslexic, but it's a real issue. Tell us a little bit about some of the stats. Give us some information about, this world, and maybe people who don't even realize that they are dyslexic or have this neurodiversity issue. What can they do, or how?
And do you know what, Adrian? I'd love to say the world's moved on with dyslexia, but it hasn't. I've been speaking to some of the young dyslexics in WPP who've just finished university, and they've been through the same issue as me. They weren't diagnosed till university. They struggled through school. That knocks your confidence. This is still a major issue. 1 in 10, if you look at the UK stats, is people are dyslexic, right? So 10% of any organization is dyslexic. The US stats seem to think that could be up to 20%. In creative industries like WPP, because of the way that dyslexic thinking happens, you are naturally more creative, you're entrepreneur, you see the bigger picture, you're likely to be good at art and all of those things. So in the creative industry, it's probably a lot higher. And actually there's 70% of general disabilities are hidden. Right, so you're looking at someone, you won't know if they're neurodiverse. You look at me, you don't know that I'm dyslexic. You probably do when I write an email to you. But the fact that it's so prevalent as a hidden disability, I think, is why I'm seeing a lot of social good happening around dyslexia and trying to understand it and diagnose early, because it does really disrupt people's confidence. And actually 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic.
Wow.
So we know these people have got a brain. It just works differently. And the fact is it's wired differently and they learn differently, but they have huge skills on communication, seeing the bigger picture, being creative. There's a lot of synergies with people. If you look at some of the great dyslexics, like Richard Branson, for one, who's a very well-respected entrepreneur, Alexander Graham Bell, Einstein. Wow. There's a lot of actors and actresses who are dyslexic, Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom. The list literally goes on and on and on. So these people have found what they're good at and have directed that in the right way. And for me, with dyslexia, it's about understanding it and how to get people to bring their best selves to whatever they want to do.
Love that. So Christina, I mean, your diversity issue is not as hidden as Kelly, physical disability and accessibility. So what have been some of the, I guess, tools or movements that have been made to support people in your state?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great. We can bring up the point about intersectionality. I'm actually neurodiverse. I'm not dyslexic. My mom is, but I have bad ADHD. So I think, let's talk some of the tools I used for that is a lot of Microsoft tools. I think, from being able to focus and to being able to use Microsoft to manage my schedule when my kind of mind is all over the place. That's been really helpful when it comes to, my physical disability that happened later in life with my arms being paralyzed. I think that all of the technology that, we've used for our clients, and especially us focusing on Microsoft, which has built-in accessibility features like dictation, and, they have their creative genius AI that basically tells you how to design a PowerPoint and does it for you, so that I don't have to, use a little bit use that I have of my hand to move around the mouse to be able to design something. So, those are the two big things that I use. I mean, I can control my computer via my voice. And what's interesting is all of those tools, when it comes to email and voice and the computer, that was all created for a person with a disability and are now used by all. So really, those tools that help me a lot of times help people who aren't, struggling with the same disability that I have. Shows, innovation to benefit people with disabilities like Kelly and I have, benefited everyone. And that's why it is so important to have diverse teams working on things, because they're able to create innovations and also better experiences, since the world is so diverse. And I think, one example of, how I'm doing it at Wunderman Thompson is really looking at font, because as Kelly said, there's so many dyslexic people. And
Comic Sans is the best one, and creatives hate
it is, and creatives hate it. So it's like, do we come up with our own fonts, or do we use something that has, a similar shape to Comic Sans, but maybe looks a little bit prettier, so that we can ensure? And the same thing with color. 8% of males have some sort of color impairment. So why are we using color to indicate an action on our websites? Making sure that we're taking those things in so that we can provide, better communications for our employees, and then a better product for our clients.
And I'd add on that with the technology side, as you know, Adrian, we've been working with the D&I team to make sure the accessibility features are rolled out. And, they help people with physical disabilities. But for me, there's the learning tools which help with the reading and the spacing. And as I said earlier, I was using dictation, which, writing an email can take me twice or three times as long as somebody else, but by dictating it, I actually get out what I'm trying to say, as opposed to my brain trying to engage with what I'm trying to write. And it's those small things actually that make a massive difference to people. Sure. It's what I've learned at WPP. Captioning, making sure that you turn subtitles on when you present in PowerPoint, because there could be someone who's deaf in the audience. They don't want to tell you they're deaf. And actually, to be honest, they might not be deaf. They might just be like my dad, 80, who can barely hear anything anyway. And that would help. So all these things are not necessarily, I think we need to look at disability differently and accessibility differently, and more about the wider inclusion piece.
Yeah, or language. I think, being in a global position, I'm constantly giving presentations around the world. Mm-hmm. And by me, not having to learn that language, I can just put the captioning in, I can speak English, and then it can come out as Spanish in the subtitles. And that's one of, I think my favorite features, because when you look at disability, you need to look at it something like, you have situational. Then you have, which would be like you're in a foreign country and you can't speak the language. Then you have temporary, which could be, a broken arm. And then you have permanent, like myself. So really looking at the breadth of it allows you to reframe the disability narrative. But I also think it's really interesting about Microsoft tools and really focusing, as many of these in the marketing, world and advertising world, we're also tech companies. Yeah. And we're creating things for our clients. And my father, who's a judge, he's a criminal judge, and there was a young teen boy acting out and things like that. And it came to the court, and my dad realized that, oh my God, I think he can't read. And no one's picking up on this, not even his lawyer.
Wow.
And then he's like, I'm not going to send this kid to jail. This kid needs to get tested, finds out he's dyslexic.
Wow.
And then he gets the help that he needs and doesn't end up going to jail. And I think that like we need to link, all of these things and look at the domino effect that happens. I mean, 50% of people killed by the police have a disability in the United States. And we need to look at intersectionality, especially because if there is some tool that, let's say, a deaf person is getting pulled over by the cops, can't understand what they're hearing, but they're driving. If we can build accessibility into tools, I think it would prevent, some of the issues that we see. And that's why it's so important. And that's why, with marketing and advertising, that helps with awareness, but also product design, which sometimes we do in marketing and advertising. We help our clients with product design, making sure inclusion is built in. And that's why at Wunderman, Thompson, at WPP, we've gotten so close with Microsoft, because we realize that accessibility unlocks potential from 25% of people, and that's huge when we look at it just as efficiency play.
Yeah, I think with as I talked about before, with the mindset change around accessibility and disability, is people need to stop thinking that it's for disabled people, right? The people you can see and who are clearly, if you've lost your legs or something, because actually the situational piece is really important. And by the way, any of us could become disabled at any point. So having appreciation for it is important. And I guarantee you probably know somebody, friends or family, but the situational piece, I always joke to Christina, is when I go skiing in the winter, I'm trying to not temporarily disable myself by breaking my legs. Or if I land in India, I don't speak the language, and all of a sudden my surroundings, I can't communicate, I can't do the things I want to do. And it's about breaking down those barriers, really, and appreciating that it really is generally about inclusion and not the environment excluding you.
Yeah, I really think that is that point of situational disability. You put it in perspective that at any point in any time, someone can be affected with some type of disability based off of what happened. So having that sense of empathy and understanding, I think, goes a long way if we can just have the thought process of how to, at least look at things differently, treat people differently, and just have a better general understanding. Everyone, I guess, I always say sometimes D&I is in my DNA, and my difference, makes a difference. How has your difference, or how has your, diversity issue, do you think has contributed to the larger society, or what are you doing personally that you can say has, really made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm definitely trying to make a difference. I mean, WPP makes, I think it's like 1 out of 6 ads. And I'm trying to lead kind of a movement within WPP to really think about how we're addressing this issue from an accessibility of our ads, but then also representation. You'll see at Canna, and I warn, all the viewers, is that we really need to avoid inspiration porn. And that's just showing people with disabilities as an inspiration. We need to show them in their regular lives and really kind of make it normal to be disabled. Not that everyone's going to be an Olympic athlete or be the first, person ever to have a C-level job as a disabled person. Those stories, they happen, but let's normalize it and make sure that we're creating content that allows for that. And those are really 2 things that I am, inspiring and pushing teams to bring that type of knowledge to their clients and push their clients to make really inclusive work. And then I think outside, I'm really trying to help people with disabilities get jobs. I'm on the board of Inclusively, which is a job platform that uses AI for people with disabilities. Actually, Microsoft's one of our main clients, but we're launching fully in August. And then with Open Style Lab is teaching STEM through fashion design to underfunded teen girls. So really bringing those skills and those tools that are accessible, like what Microsoft is doing, to people so that they can, participate in the creative field. So those are really kind of the 3-prong approach that I have. But I'm just lucky to, to be at a company that really considers accessibility and have a client like Microsoft that does too.
How about you, Kelly?
Yeah, point of difference, interesting. I think if I think about the work that I do with you guys, I mean, a couple of years ago, I would say I really became very open about my dyslexia, and I spent time with an A-level student who was struggling, and I introduced her to one of our tech evangelists for accessibility, who showed her all the dyslexia tools that a couple of years ago I didn't know about, right? And I was like, wow, this is game changing. Listening to her at 17, I was going through the same struggles that I had 20 odd years ago. I thought I need to help more people understand that this stuff is there, right? And I started off actually doing dyslexia kids camps. So a bunch of volunteers at Microsoft put on some kids camps over the summer to show them, so they come in, have some fun, show them the tools that they could use, equip them to go back. We did a Christmas one. And then, last year I took on the role with WPP and yourselves. And I think this really kind of gave me an opportunity to relate to what I do. So I've had the privilege to bring passionate about to my job on a daily basis. And, I would say I probably was banging the accessibility drum about our technology and what it could do. And I felt very passionate about it, that we could really empower WPP's employees through the use of the Microsoft technology, and working with yourselves, everybody can do it and it's more inclusive, I think is what makes you want to get out of bed in the morning. And so for me, my point of difference is trying to use my personal experience of accepting that I'm different and how technology can really help me, and wanting it to help other people. And then, some people say to me, but maybe it's easier because you do have a disability. And I would say no. Sometimes it's harder because you're really giving yourself. I have to be very, in some senses, quite vulnerable with my customer about who I am and what I stand for. And then I met Christina, and that just changed everything as well, because what she's trying to do motivated me even more. It kind of opened my eyes to the wider spectrum of inclusion and design. And I think by having close proximity, you can find motivation. So you don't have to have a disability. You don't have to be neurodiverse. But I guarantee someone, right? And you can learn about it. It's no different to what's happening with Black Lives Matter. I'm having to learn about that. I'm having to educate myself. Accessibility and inclusive design is no different. I guarantee you probably know someone who struggles with something, whether it's physical, mental health, anything like that. And you can educate yourself and you can have your point of difference. And I think that's important for people to think about.
That is great. I was just thinking, that point of crossing the intersectionality between race and disability is, definitely one of those aha moments for people to be able to create moments of understanding. If they view things like there is going to be a point of difference, and what makes you a better person in the process is educating yourself and learning about that other person or, situation that you are not familiar with. I know there have been some brands out there, and I know, Christina, some work that you participated in had to do with Tommy Hilfiger. Tell us about that, how that came about in that campaign.
Yeah, so Tommy Hilfiger decided to launch an adaptive clothing line. An adaptive clothing line is ones that either use closures that are slightly different than, and what I mean by closures are they created a magnetic zipper that you can unzip with one hand, or magnetic buttons that look like regular buttons, but you don't have to push the button through a hole in your shirt. It's just two magnets, they come together, but they are covered in the top of a button, so it just looks, normal. And they've done different cuts for jeans so that if you're in a seated position, it's fit better, because if you use a wheelchair to get around, your body might be shaped a little bit different. And they needed us to reach this market and create an inclusive campaign around it. And it was a really amazing experience. And I think what was so great was that we had a blind director, we had disabled actors and actresses, and we created an Alexa skill that allowed people with disabilities to shop via their voice, because many environments are not accessible for people to shop. So really making sure that the first mass fashion brand had an amazing campaign to go along with it. And I think it's extremely important. And, I'm working with a few other brands that aren't fashion to do the same thing, because when we talk about equality and equity, equality, everyone has the same opportunities, but there's been a lot of underfunded groups, like, Black and disabled, trans, that need to be uplifted right now. And they need to have a larger equity stake. And we need to create products that are reflected in those individuals. And I'm working on that with a few brands now. And then also making sure that they're represented in the ad, because I think that even if you create a product, you should show those people in those ads that are the users. And I think that's really important. That's what people want to see. I mean, 70% of consumers prefer to buy from brands that are inclusive. And I think there's a new study from Google that came out that 64% of people, or 64, 67, saw an inclusive ad and took an action after it.
Wow.
So this is what the consumers want to see. And right now, because Tommy was such a success, I've had some successes with a few other companies that I can't talk about yet because it's not live. But, people are starting to see that they need to do this, and that this is what, consumers want.
Yeah, and I would agree, Microsoft have to make all of their products and services accessible. You look at the success that we had with the Xbox controller, the accessible Xbox controller that enables everybody to play. You've probably seen the advert, but it's those changes that consumers are looking for. They want people to feel included, and I think it's also, if you're not doing it well, you'll get called out on it as well. So companies, if companies are not taking it seriously and thinking it's a fad and it's going to go away, it's not. And it's actually a huge opportunity that could be missed. There's been many examples of companies in the past that have just got it wrong, haven't meant to get it wrong, but have got it wrong and suffered a huge consequence off the back of it. No one's perfect. Everyone is trying to do their best. And I think that, I know that I'm always looking, like you say, Christina, I react more to stuff now more than ever if I see it's got purpose. Even that, it might not be accessibility, but it's how it was made or how that company pay its employees and how they treat their employees. As soon as you hear bad things, you think, not so sure about that.
So it's
the small ways to be an ally.
Yeah. And you brought up that point of purpose, and that sort of moved you to pay attention to the brands who seem to have purpose. And why should businesses look at doing business with other folks that have purpose? Like, why should you look at a business or do business with other organizations that are leading from purpose-driven, missions? Yeah.
I mean, if enough people put their money where their mouth is, because you see so many people that support, and we saw it with, Black Lives Matter, people putting up the Black post on Instagram, but they need to put their money where their mouth is and spend their dollars that support, the Black community. And I think that we're starting to see that, but we need to get everyone that's on their social, supporting it on social too, but really buying from brands that care, because that can put an indent in the business. And a great example of that is Victoria's Secret. Victoria's Secret came out with ads that they felt like putting the message, this is the perfect body. And I don't know anybody that looks like that. And that's not representative of demographics today. No. It's not me for sure, especially after Corona. That's just not going to happen. So, we saw that today's consumers didn't buy that messaging because they felt as though it didn't have a purpose that was to uplift, young women and have positive self-esteem for their bodies. And they shopped from other brands like Aerie. And I think that that's a great example of, why from purpose-driven brands and why brands should be purpose.
And I think, Microsoft is a company who's very purpose-driven. Our values are well embedded in this area for diversity and inclusion through our products, how we make them, how we engage with our partners, how we do business with our customers. I don't really see it as a choice that businesses have, right? Purpose drives purpose as well. What we're finding when we work together, me and Christina, is, combined Microsoft technology with the creative power of WPP is a much bigger, broader mission than one company can do together. So, whether that's accessibility or sustainability or a multitude of things that we all want to do and drive purpose, if we focus on just doing it as one organization rather than a collective of organizations that can support each other, we're going to get there a lot slower, I think. And so that's why I would encourage businesses, we open up from an accessibility inclusion perspective, we opened up our accessibility training to every person who wants to take it. It's globally available for free, right? We've learned a lot. We put that training together. It was well received in Microsoft, and now we've opened it up for free to the rest of the world to use it as they choose to. And I think that when you have purpose-driven companies, they're not trying to retain all their assets and just use it as a competitive advantage. You generally just want to be improving things within the world together.
Yeah, you brought up sort of a hint of companies and organizations that do what I call, they make symbolic gestures. So they may put up a black box, or they may put out a statement that, Black Lives Matter. What companies, and it's been really just a symbolic gesture because there's no follow-up, and then like a couple of months or years later, we see some of the bad behavior continues. What other organizations have you seen that you would say didn't quite get it right, or have sort of made some mistakes that you think could do better as it relates to the space of accessibility and messaging and neurodiversity issues?
Yeah, Lego is a great brand, but they tried to make accessible Legos for visual impairment with Braille on the Legos. But the one thing that they forgot was to add audio descriptive to the video talking about it. So if you're a blind user, you wouldn't understand what's going on in the promo video. So there's a lot of brands that don't think about the end-to-end inclusion in an experience. And, it might cover up the great efforts that they were doing to create that Lego Braille device. So I think, it's everyone means to be good, but sometimes it's really working with the community. And that's why, I have my community of disabled consultants within Wunderman Thompson that I go to help me with all my projects, because I don't want to make those mistakes, and I want it to be, human-centered. And, I've seen really great examples, and especially, I think when it comes to ensuring that there's Black equity is what, Netflix just did with Bose. Just, C-suite, CMO right there. And then we're going to commit to, making more films and then investing in Black-owned companies. Yeah. I think that's a great example of, from another, underfunded group, which is, Black females. That was a great way. And I think Microsoft is really the shining star when it comes to living and breathing their motto. And I'm super proud to be working with them.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Christina. There's things like recently I was very proud Microsoft have launched an initiative to help 25 million people reskill due to COVID. So they're investing a lot of money in reskilling to help change the economy and the diversity of the skills that we have. And I think that is a good example of, saying you want to make a change and then actually investing in that change. That was recently announced, and made me as an employee feel pretty proud of that in terms of the societal difference that will make. You know, we're all having challenges with COVID. It's affected a lot of families. People are genuinely having to reskill and find new jobs, and, you know, especially the lower income range of people as well. And I think, you know, it's seeing those sorts of initiatives. And I know, Christina, we work with amazing companies, you know, like Unilever, for example. I was on a CEO, listening to their CEO talking about what they're doing with diversity inclusion and how they're looking at it and how they support their local economies and the things that they're putting in place. And it's those sorts of companies that you tend to gravitate towards because you hear what they're doing and you want to see the difference that they're making.
So there's a question now. We've given some really good, you know, advice and thoughts to everyone about what can be done. What else would you tell from a range of people, maybe folks from the next generation all the way up? And let's start with, you know, the next generation, because, you know, they're the ones that are going to be taking our jobs and moving this whole thing forward. What advice would you give to them? And I'd say extend it all the way up to the C-suite.
Yeah.
I'd say at the talent end that's coming through, the fresh talent, be curious and be brave. Companies, you know, if a company worth its salt that you're working for will want to embrace your diversity of thought and your passion. Don't wait to be tapped on the shoulder, because that won't happen, right? You've got to get out there and kind of get involved with things and be passionate about things and be wanting to make a difference. And I think that's quite infectious when you're around it. It brings people together, and don't lose sight of that. I think, you know, we all get dragged down into our day jobs, and we've got to lift our heads up a little bit and think about the bigger picture and the wider good that we'd like to do. You know, and I have found that I've been able to do that with WPP, and it's been really motivating in my role. So I would encourage people to do that.
And so that's the younger group, but what would you say for leaders, or, you know, what would you tell them to do? How can they be more accepting of people?
I think it's a tricky one. I find our leadership team very accepting. I think that it comes down to don't be a figurehead. You know, you're there to understand, and, you know, proximity drives empathy. Get out there and talk to people and actually understand it from the different perspectives, and take that diversity of thought into your thinking and your strategy, because changes in a company culturally and how you embrace this come from the top. Right. Our CEO is amazing, very inspirational, very passionate about diversity, inclusion, Satya Nadella. That trickles through right through the organization. And as a CEO, it's their responsibility to set the tone, to set the direction and the behaviors that you want people to display, and make sure then that translates to the middle management, because they're the people that then manage the people. And that's where sometimes between high level strategy and the reality of what's happening on the ground can become disconnected. And I think it's making sure that everything flows through. And at the end of the day, it has to be authentic. If it's not how everybody's driven in a company, and for example, in Microsoft, we have D&I commitments to the business. It's part of our values. And that's with every single employee expected to have, you know, conversations with their customers, with their partners, with their suppliers, to live and breathe their values. And that has to be done through strong leadership. And I would say consistency as well. It's very easy for leaders to chop and change their strategy. Our mission statement has been solid for the last 7 years on what we're trying to do. I get clarity every year as we evolve and what we're doing under that mission. But I think it's really important to have that North Star and be driving everybody to it.
Great. How about you, Christina?
Yeah, I mean, Kelly, I think it's a great point about proximity and empathy. So for the younger generation just coming into the workforce, I would tell them to take a look around who you're, you know, surrounding yourself and what books you're reading and what you're doing, because most likely you're hanging out with people that are just like you. And it's time, and I know that's based off of, you know, biases and environments and things like that, or who you grew up with. But take that look and say, who am I learning from? and take that time to learn from people and hang out with people maybe a little bit different from you. That's, you know, one of my biggest regrets, I think, was that I didn't spend more time doing that. And, you know, that's where I would change. And I would say for the C-suite, think about who you're making room for now. And then in addition to that, start to make and carve out room for people that are completely different than them. And that's what happened to me at Wunderman Thompson. You know, they made room for me at, you know, higher levels to be in those meetings, to try to change their perceptions and provide that insight based off, you know, of my lived experience. And I think, you know, making concrete changes in the ways that they can to their work was extremely impactful. And I really, really push other leaders to do that. And I think, you know, we've seen great business success because they've done that. And those are the two things, you know, really that I suggest to do. And you know, I really strongly believe that because of the circumstances that has happened in the last, you know, 4 months with COVID and Black Lives Matter, empathy will be increased and businesses will change for the better.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I'm thinking about succession planning. You brought that up a little bit, and how are we thinking about bringing in that next generation? So I think, you know, you're absolutely right. Leadership has to be a lot more thoughtful about who they're bringing in and putting at the tables with us and lessons that they're teaching us. So we're building a new culture of, you know, communities and organizations to make sure that that purpose-driven organization, that purpose is driving the organization, and building a stronger culture is much better. So I know,
tapping into those resource groups around the business, you know, that the top leaders actually hearing their voices. There's amazing talent in those employee resource groups that companies have, and they can drive real change and give a real perspective on a number of issues that happen in the external and internal world of an organization. So I think, you know, that's another area that people should be really proud of looking into.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think, you know, the ERGs really hold the culture and energy of an organization. They give it its personality and what it does, because it allows the space for people to be their authentic selves and kind of share that with each other. And I think organizations have to be very intentional about investing more in ERGs, because, you know, ERG leaders and groups, they have their day jobs and they're only given a small budget to work with as it relates to the ERG. So it'd be awesome if, you know, all of us, anyone listening, to make sure that you take back to your organizations. We know you have these employee resource groups. Make sure you invest in them so that they can keep the culture and community going.
And invest in employees' training and awareness. Yeah. You know, I didn't wake up yesterday understanding what allyship is. Yeah. Microsoft had a course that I went on to understand it and really have, you know, workshops around it and understand what it means to me, or unconscious bias and understanding what that means. You know, employees don't necessarily just because you tell them to do it, they need the training and the infrastructure behind them through the organization to make those changes.
Yeah. And I think that point of training is really critical, because I think the loyalty that you create with your employees within an organization, or your colleagues, your family, you know, when I get to a company, I feel like it's my family, that you have to invest in them. And I think the more you invest in the education and training, the more value that you create in that relationship. I think there's a treasure factor that increases when we are invested in and we're allowed the opportunity to learn more. So Christina, I know you have a meeting to go to.
Yes, a D&I meeting, which is exciting.
So that's a good thing. We want you to have a very strong voice in that. So we'll give you the last word before we say goodbye. And I think this 45 minutes, though, was great and filled with lots of good information that we'll share. And the good thing is we're recording all of this, so we'll be able to share with more people.
I hope it was interesting for people. It was definitely fun for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
amazing. Thank you.
Final word before we go?
You know, reach out to Kelly and I. We're here to help. And, you know, I think it's all about reaching and taking that effort and leaning on others for education.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Kelly Monday. there's not that many of us. So.
Well, Kelly,
amazing.
Christine Mallon, thank you so much for starting us off on this Tech Tuesday. I think it was very informative and people have learned a lot. I always feel like I am much smarter after talking to you two ladies. So
I feel the same way.
I'm really grateful to be a part of the crew. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone else that's watching.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, guys.